He stayed there, got enough money, he goes back to Italy, they buy a second tract of land. When Luciano was gone the 6 months, from April to October, before the 1923, it was his father that sent him back also because Luciano had strong desires for Angelina. And when he got back, they got married. After they get back, Luciano goes back, he gets inducted into the Italian military in World War I. He's up in the Alps fighting. He has a severe abdominal wound. Galletti, gallant. He almost died. He laid in the trenches. They merely put his intestines back in and sewed him up. So God spared him again. He was spared. He had religion. His third son, Egidio, was born while Luciano was away fighting the war. 1923, he gets the land, he goes back. 1929, Primo, born in Cherry, Illinois, had these desires also to come back to America. His mother, Angelina, when Augusto first came to America, she was such a devoted Italian mother and a good, loving wife, who really her first true love. She put a perfumed handkerchief and a holy rosary in his trunk, so that when he got to America, when he opened this trunk, it would remind him of her and the kids. When Luciano came back in 1923, she did the same thing. Perfumed handkerchief and a holy rosary. Her oldest son, Primo, he comes in 1929 at the age of 17, and he never saw his family again after that. He comes to America. 1929, she puts a perfumed handkerchief and a holy rosary in his trunk. And whose trunk did Primo have? He had Luciano's trunk. And that trunk we've had for years until it got destroyed in a flood. So we don't have that trunk anymore. I think you might still have that perfumed handkerchief. Do you? I don't know. But anyway, Primo comes to America. He moves into Ladd, Illinois. He goes to work, he lives with his godfather, his godparents, who happen to be Mary Galletti, the daughter of Luigi and Beatrice, married to Antilio Corsini, who was his godparents. He goes to work in the Cherry Mine. He is in there for a half a day. That half a day, he walked out and never returned to that mine again. His godfather, and you got to, again, put yourself in time to in the 1900s, 1929. People were getting, at the mine, they were earning maybe like $2.50 a day. In Ladd, Illinois, when they first came over, it was $1.50 a day. $1.50 a day. But they were making money, they were saving. Primo walks out of that mine at the noon whistle and never returns. He goes back to his godfather's house, and the godfather expounded him. He says, "You're worthless, you're no good. You can't, who are you, the son of Angelina and Luciano? What kind of a son are you?" Well, Primo went on, basically an immigrant without any money. He ends up getting into Naplate, where she was born and raised. He gets a job at the glass factory, and he worked 43 years and never missed an unscheduled day of work. In fact, he worked the midnight shift on the day of his only daughter's wedding. And he saved money, he bought land, he cemented it in America. In America, he continued to prosper. The Italians were having all these problems. You had World War I, you had World War II, the Depression, you had all this stuff. You had Hitler, you had Mussolini. Total communications was lost. After the war, Primo reestablished contacts. In fact, we got a little time here. We do. They gave us a half hour.
My husband's going to tell you the whole book,
I
right?
need
You
to
won't want
tell
to
you
buy
this.
it when he's done.
No, I'm telling you, it's the type of thing where it started out with her wanting to know who she was, where she came from. And there isn't a person in this room that doesn't have the same type thing. It may not be Italian, it could be German, it could be Swede, but we've all had our hardships. and we've all had our joys. So after the Second World War, when the Germans were retreating, they raided the farmhouse in Fanano. The youngest daughter, Irina, was like 15 years old. Angelina was in her 50s. They physically abused, but there were other kinder Germans that stopped the actions that were going on. And Luciano, he was in the Italian underground. He was away at the time. And he did everything he could to help drive those Germans out of there. Angelina died at the age of 59, about 3 to 4 months after the Germans raided the house. The youngest daughter, she went to live with her older married sister, Maria. And in Italy today, Primo still has 3 brothers alive and 1 sister. And Augusta Mary, the girl that was born 12 days after the mine disaster, of course, she died, she's got kids, but her brother Mario, his widow, I understand, is still alive today. So anyway, as we continue on here, I just want to let you know that there is a lot of oneness in this world. And in a way, we're all one here too. If it wasn't for us being in America, you wouldn't see me being married to an Italian girl, or an Italian girl being married to a German English guy. It could only happen in America. And that's what makes us great. The world's getting smaller. We know who we are. You know who you are. And if it wasn't for the 1909 Cherry mine disaster, she would have never been born. We would have never met. We wouldn't have been able to pull this story together. But we know who we are. We're still a spot in history, as all of you are, but we will go on, we will prevail, and there will be oneness. Thank you.
I am Karen
Karen,
Tintori.
excuse me 1 minute. Karen, this is 6 days from now, it's the 100th anniversary, right? Karen Tintori's family and my wife's family, we found out, here it is 100 years later, there's like 5th or 6th cousins from the Cherry mine disaster,
And we just
and it's the
met.
first time they met tonight.
Tonight.
Right.
Yes.
Very first time we've met. Thank you.
I'm Karen Tintori, and I am the author of Trapped, the 1909 Cherry Mine Disaster, which was published by Simon & Schuster in 2002. And like Lorena, this book began as a genealogical search. I was born in Detroit. I grew up in Detroit. I was born in Lansing, Michigan. But after, I'm the granddaughter of coal miners and great-granddaughter of coal miners. My Parachetti and Galletti and Tintori relatives came over from Fanano and Pavulo in Italy to work the coal mines in Illinois. And growing up, my mom had a hunch that she was pregnant with me. And my grandfather was in the hospital, my grandfather Tintori, and this was before they killed the rabbits to find out if people were pregnant. And she said to him, "I think I'm pregnant," and he said, "I won't live to see the baby," and he died the next day. So that's my little touch with my grandfather. He knew I was coming, I knew that he knew. And growing up, we lived downstairs in Detroit from my grandmother, who was his widow, whose father worked in the mines in LaSalle and Spring Valley and died in his 40s of black lung disease. And she would say to me, "Your grandfather survived the Cherry mine disaster." Well, I remember hearing this. We lived with her till I was 8 years old, and we moved to a different house. But I remember that as a like, your grandfather walked on water. And being a little girl under 8 years old, I never asked her for details. By the time I decided to start doing genealogy, my father was dead, my grandmother Tintori was dead, anybody basically who I could talk to about the disaster was dead, except for my cousin Lester Corsini, who was Attilio Corsini's son. And so my cousin Lester and I sat down over breakfast one day with pictures that he had of the Cherry mine disaster and various artifacts that he had, and we talked about the Cherry mine disaster. I wrote a letter to the United Mine